ladies. And thank you so much for coming out in this cold weather. The topic of today's class is finding faith. And we'll be looking at a Jewish perspective on pain and suffering. I'd like to start with a text on page 22 in your books. It's an excerpt from a song. It's in 1984. I'm going to ask you to take a quick look at that and see if you could find a paradox there. Have you found it?
Yeah.
It jumps out on you. It's pretty clear. Okay, Rivka, tell us your thoughts.
My God, obviously he believes in God. Why have you forsaken me? He hasn't. But it's kind of a confusing song.
Yes, it is. It's this paradox. On one hand, David is asking God why he abandoned him, but he's asking that of that very same God who he's accusing of this neglect. Does anyone have any thoughts to add to that? Can anyone personally relate to this feeling of, on one hand, feeling abandoned by God, yet on the other hand, reaching out to God for help?
I remember Rabbi Dubrovsky always taught, no matter what happens, it's for the good. God does everything for the good. We don't necessarily understand it. In fact, we just don't. Mm-hmm. But it is for the good. And if you can just believe in that, it changes the way you look at life. It certainly has changed me dramatically. Mm-hmm. So that when horrible things happen, I just go, wait a minute. There's a reason for this. Can I think of the reason? And if I can't, then okay, I accept that it's necessary. Let's get on with the next bit.
Mm-hmm. That's a very, very important point.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing. It's very important. And I'm glad you brought that up, Rivka, because that is actually something that we will be exploring in depth in tonight's class. Okay, so hold that. We're going to get to it soon. So this paradox of feeling neglected by God yet turning to God is one of a few questions that we will be looking at tonight while we explore how Judaism, how Torah looks at how we approach painful experiences, how we approach suffering. We now find ourselves in the beginning of the Hebrew month of Teves. Teves is the darkest month of the year, physically, and spiritually as well. The energies of Teves are Tevet, another pronunciation. Do you remember the spelling for Tevet? It's Tevet. The energies of the month of Teves or Tevet are conducive to taking a look at how we view our not such good experiences in life and to finding the tools to effectively deal with these experiences. This is the month where we get an extra boost, so to speak, from the energies around us to do that and to accomplish that. This coming Friday is the 10th of Tevet, which is a sad day on the Jewish calendar. In the year 425 before the Common Era, King Nebuchadnezzar, who's the Babylonian king, laid siege to Jerusalem. And 2 years later, the walls of Jerusalem were breached, And in the month of Av that year, the temple fell. And subsequently, the Jews lost their autonomy of Israel and they were exiled to Babylonia. Although several decades later, the Persians vanquished the Babylonians and the Jews were able to rebuild their second temple, a few hundred years later, 400 years later, the second temple was destroyed as well. And again, we found ourselves in exile, the exile that we still find ourselves in to this day. And the truth is that even though the Jews did rebuild the second temple, and they had that second temple for over 400 years, they never truly regained autonomy. So we see that the event of the 10th of Tevet, when the Babylonians surrounded the city of Jerusalem, that event was a catalyst for a whole series of calamities, culminating in the destruction of the second temple and the exile we find ourselves in now, which has been full, unfortunately, of pain and suffering, which still hasn't ended. And what I would like to explore tonight, to ask ourselves tonight is, where did our ancestors find the tools to cope with suffering throughout all of history? And how do we find those tools today to cope with our own suffering? Whether it's on a global scale, as a Jewish nation, the suffering that we go through, or on a personal level. How do we cope? How do we react? What should our reaction be to our painful experiences? Now, let's start with the obvious question. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is there suffering? Why do we have to go through these painful experiences? This is a very human question. It definitely does not demonstrate a lack of belief in God. If anything, it proves the opposite. Because if one does not believe in God, then they believe the world is a random series of events, and then if they're suffering, okay, well, there's something else random in the world. Whereas if you believe in a God where things are not random, where things should have a purpose, then we wonder, well, in that case, why is there suffering? So it's a very important question. It's a very human question. And the truth is that the very first person recorded in Torah who asked this question was our great leader, Moses. So I'd like to direct you, please, ladies, to text number 2, page 20. And here we find ourselves. It's just after the Jews committed the sin of the golden calf. We've just received the Torah, heard God's voice on Mount Sinai, and it didn't take long before the Jewish nation did something contrary to what they had just had revealed to them, and they built a golden calf and worshipped it. And of course, God was very, very angry. And as we'll see a little later on, actually in tonight's class, Moses had to beg God to forgive the Jewish people and not to destroy them. But this text here, text number 2, is already post-forgiveness. God has finally forgiven the Jewish people. And at this point, Moses has a question for God. What does he ask God? Take a look. Anyone? Pray, let me know your ways, so that I may know. What is Moses really asking? So we're going to turn to the Talmud, who expounds on this verse. Okay, this verse is biblical. It's in the Chumash, in the Bible. And the Talmud expounds on it. Okay, so text number 3. What was Moses asking God? That I may know you. It's the question that we just raised, which is, why do some righteous people have to go through painful experiences? Why do you cause bad things to happen to good people? Now, I don't know whether Moses received an answer to that question, but what I do know is that we are certainly not privy to that information. God did not choose to allow us to know this. Why not? What would be so wrong with knowing? If God had to program suffering into his world, why can't we at least know the reason?
We might give up.
If we did know the reason?
Yeah.
Okay, would you like to elaborate on that?
No.
By giving up, what do you mean?
No matter what I do, everything goes wrong. I can't believe that, that guy down the street was a thief and a blackmailer. Everything goes right for him, everything goes wrong for me. I'm just going to quit, take my own life, and that's the end of it.
Okay, and is that knowing why bad things happen
That would
or
be
not
knowing.
knowing?
That would be knowing.
Okay.
I think we have not free choice. If we have, like, we do it wrong, we getting bad something. We do it good, we getting good. We have no choice, just free choice. Because everybody doing like, don't want to bad to yourself. I don't know how to explain that.
So you mean it would be obvious to choose to do good if
Yes,
we would be
because-
rewarded with good?
Yes,
It would be too obvious.
yes.
Too
It's,
easy.
yes. and,
Okay.
I think that everybody wants to do good because
There's no challenge
yeah.
in doing good. It would be too easy. Okay, good point.
The reason for why things always work out for me, then I just relax and not worry about it and not try to do anything. I think. And if I know the reason things always go badly for me, I would have nothing to gain by trying to do good.
It's a very important point what you're saying, Rivka. I think, if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that if we know why bad things happen, we won't bother trying to change things.
That's
Is
what
that
I'm
what you
trying
mean?
to say,
Yeah, we won't demand a change. We won't bother praying to God to change things. We won't bother taking action ourselves because it's obviously meant to happen. And we're going to elaborate on that point. But before we get to that, that will be our second point in this issue. There's another point I'd like to bring up. And that is, if we understood the reason for suffering, we might become numb to suffering. If we're able to rationalize why someone's suffering, then it's not unthinkable anymore. So it's not so painful. Someone might have a health issue, but we know why God gave them that health issue. So we say, it's sad, but I get it. And we put it in that little box. It now has a reason, and we can move on.
I don't understand. You know why God gave us?
Let's say we knew the reason why people suffer. We knew the reasons for suffering. So it desensitizes us. Because if there's a reason, well, it may be sad, it might be unfortunate that God decided this person should suffer, but I get it. It makes sense. I know why God did it. So, okay, I can accept it. I can move on. It's not as painful. When is something the height of pain? When it's unthinkable, so senseless. Why does this person have to suffer like this? It's so senseless, and it's so painful. It's not senseless. We can make sense of it. We can put it in that little box with a stamp, okay, I understand it. We're able to move on. And of course, this applies in the intense tragedies in life, but we could also apply this on the other end of the spectrum, less intense situations, let's say in relationships. Let's say let's say you were hurt by something, and you want to vent. So whether it's to your friend, your spouse, sister, coworker. You want to vent to someone who you have a relationship with, who you care about each other. And imagine your friend tells you, oh, I know why she said that to you. She's probably having a bad day. Or, I know why she never returned your emails for the last 3 months. She's going through such and such a thing, so it makes sense. Or, you know what? You're really tired. I see it in your eyes. I think you're overreacting. Get a good night's sleep, and in the morning it won't bother you so much. Now imagine you were the one venting, and you got these responses from your friend. How would you feel?
Find another friend.
Yeah, it's annoying, right? We might feel resentful. Why? Because it's obvious to you that your friend doesn't understand your pain. Your friend doesn't understand your suffering. If she really understood, she would empathize with me. She wouldn't try giving me solutions and rationalizing it. That's number one. There's a value to not understanding sometimes. And number two is what Rivka brought up before. That if we understood why God does things the way he does, if we understood why people are suffering, we might not be compelled to take action. Because I understand why this person is going through whatever they're going through. I understand why this person has this health issue. I'm not going to mix in. She's supposed to have it, and I know very well why. So although it may be unfortunate, it may be sad, I'm going to let it run its course. Who am I to mix into God's plans? But that's not the way we're supposed to react to someone's pain. We're not supposed to be complacent and just sit there and let it run its course. And if we understood why someone was suffering, we might be in danger of doing just that. And in fact, two very prominent Jewish leaders are great examples of this in how they reacted to two different scenarios where the Jewish people's existence was at risk. And I'd like to turn to text number 5. And here we have Abraham's plea. And I don't know if you're familiar with this story. There was the city Sodom. That's a pretty well-known city, infamous, shall we say, infamous city. Very, very morally corrupt. And it reached a point where God could no longer allow this city and its inhabitants to exist because they had reached such a low that they just could not be in this world anymore. And God decided he is going to destroy this city. And he told Abraham of his plan. When Abraham heard this plan, as a good Jewish leader, he was going to fight for his people. And he said to God, God, with all due respect, I'm not sure if what you're about to do is so just. If you are the epitome of justice, is it right that you should destroy a city where there might be some righteous people still? What if there's 50 righteous people? Will you still destroy the city? And God said no. And Abraham continues, because he's a practical guy. He knows, well, it probably isn't 50 righteous people in Sodom. It's a pretty bad city. So he says, God, you're the master of justice. Would it be right for you to destroy a city that has 45 righteous people? And God said, Abraham, if there's 45, I agree with you. I will not destroy the city. And Abraham keeps going because, of course, there are not 45 righteous people in the city of Sodom. And he goes to 30 and to 25 until finally Abraham says to God, God, if there are 10 righteous people in the entire city, will you destroy the city? And God said no. Now, in the end, there weren't. There weren't even 10, and the city was destroyed. But that's besides the point right now. What we see is a very interesting reaction on Abraham's part to the news that God was going to destroy a city. He's a little bit of chutzpah over here. Bargaining with God. Negotiating. Who negotiates with God? Are we allowed to do that? But here's Abraham. And Abraham did not have a lack of faith. Abraham is known for his superhuman faith. So it's not that he had a lack of belief in God's goodness and justness. Yet here he is negotiating. But here we have Abraham fighting with God, almost accusing God, if you put it that way, You know, God, you're supposed to be just. Are you sure you're acting in a just way right now? But you know what? This is exactly what God expected of Abraham. And Abraham didn't disappoint him. He fought for his people. People were going to be suffering. He wasn't just going to sit back and let it happen. And in fact, God told Abraham of his plans, and that itself is indicative that God was waiting for Abraham to do something about it, or else why would he have even told him about it in the first place? And we see the same thing with Moses, going back to the golden calf. God wanted to wipe out the Jewish people. He just gave them the Torah. They heard from God's own voice there is only one God. And a few days later, they built an idol and they worshipped it. God said, that's it. I don't think we're going to work well with these people. It's not going to go. And I'm going to wipe them out. And Moses wasn't going to take that. And he begged and he pleaded with God to save the Jewish people, to forgive them. And Moses went as far to tell God, God, if you destroy these people, I don't want to be in your Torah. Erase me. It's almost like blackmail. Again, this is Moses. This is how he talks to God. But we're supposed to do this. When something bad is happening to another person, we are not allowed to be complacent. We need to fight. We need to beg. We need to plead. We need to demand a change. So there's tremendous value in not understanding God's ways, because it makes us more compassionate and it compels us to act, to demand change.
And what happens when we do act and our actions weaken us, make us sick, when we try to help people who are in trouble, and by helping them, we lose everything ourselves? Or we get sick through the stress and the tension. What about that?
It's a very good question. I think it's an issue on its own of how to find the balance between giving and not losing ourselves.
Care for yourself so
Yeah.
you can care for others.
Mm-hmm. But we're not really talking about that kind of extreme case. We're talking about a healthy giving, that we are obligated to give as long as it's healthy and as long as it's beneficial to do what we can.
To me, the question is, on with your line of thinking, is then it seems to me that it makes the concept of God irrelevant, because if you have to take, I mean, your suggestion was that we don't need to understand it, otherwise we become complacent. So we really have to act in a way that's moral and ethical, because that's what we need to be doing to do the right thing. So then I don't see, then to me it seems like then God becomes irrelevant in that process, because we have to do it because it's right and ethical, not because of belief in God. Do you understand? Like sort of turning it upside down?
I don't think we're taking belief in God out of the picture at all. If anything, despite the fact that we don't understand, we still do what we need to do.
That's my point.
So maybe, perhaps I'm not understanding your question correctly.
Let me help me out.
Say it again, same way you said it before.
Okay, so if you don't need to understand in order to do the right thing, then you don't need God. You just need to do the right thing.
I think doing the right thing without understanding is the biggest proof you're doing it because God asks of you to do it.
That's the core of what I'm asking here. Like that's where
Okay.
I can't make the leap. Like I don't.
Okay, so in other words, if we did things because we understood why we need to do it, then why are we doing it?
Because it's the right and ethical and moral thing to do.
Because it makes sense to me.
Or that you do the right thing, like you help people, you are sympathetic when they're suffering, or whatever examples you want to use.
And why is it the right thing?
Because, like you said, it's annoying if somebody doesn't validate your suffering or whatever it is. I mean, that's just common sense.
Okay, so from a human perspective, it makes sense
Right.
to act that way.
Right.
Okay. So where's God in the picture then? If we're doing
That's
it because...
what I'm asking.
Okay, so,
That's the question.
so if everything made sense to us, then we wouldn't need a God in the picture because we would do it on our own anyways,
Right.
right? But given that there are a lot of things that we don't understand, yet we still do them, It must be because there's a God in the picture. Otherwise, where would we come to doing these things?
Because it's the right thing to do, because it's, you know, being empathetic.
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes we would understand it on our own anyway. Many times there are things God demands of us that we would never understand on our own, yet we do them anyways.
Okay, so that's the crux of the answer then.
How do you know what God demands of us then? God doesn't talk to us.
The Torah.
Torah can be interpreted in a million different ways under a million different situations. How do you know it's God's will? This is a very dangerous open door.
Okay, that's an excellent, excellent
It's
question.
phenomenal abuse, by the way, that's been going on at the moment, the most extreme examples. So how do we know
Okay.
if we
So-
don't understand? How should we claim God's authority for actions?
Okay,
Based
Lital, it's an
on
excellent
what?
question. It's a huge question. It's probably a few classes on its own. We actually touched on this a bit in the previous class about faith versus understanding. So I'm not going to go into it now. You're welcome to view the previous class. Also, if you'd like, after tonight's class, I'm happy to discuss it further with you. It's an excellent question, but it's very, very big, and it's a bit off topic from this class. Okay?
I just want to say maybe also, as I'm listening, I'm beginning to appreciate that if we understood everything that God wanted to, we wouldn't need to trust God. And God wants an intimate relationship with us. So with that intimacy demands that we trust without knowing why or how or what, and that keeps us in that intimate relationship with God.
It's
That's
true.
how I'm seeing it now.
It's true. And it's interesting, ladies, how you kind of view this from, this not understanding from the perspective of faith. In other words, we don't understand, so therefore that means we are trusting in God. It's interesting because it happens to be in this context, our not understanding seems to me what makes us more human in this particular case. And usually when we talk about not understanding, we're talking in the context of faith. We don't understand, therefore we believe. In this case, it's sort of a different context. We don't understand, and therefore we are more human. So maybe that was the point of confusion, because we're looking at a lack of understanding in a whole different context tonight than where we usually look at it. We don't understand, therefore we're more empathetic. We don't understand, therefore we're more likely to help somebody. But it's not so much yet at this point faith related, so to speak. We're going to discuss faith a bit later on, but not so much in this context of not knowing God's ways. Okay, is that clear? Okay, let's move on a bit. So as you see, tonight we will not answer the question of why we suffer. But as we said, there's really not a reason to understand that. There's value in not understanding it to be better people. But what we will address is the what and the how. What should be our reaction to suffering? How do we cope with painful experiences? Now, at this point, I'd like to make a very important distinction between the suffering, between our own personal suffering and the suffering of others. Because the way we react in those two situations are very, very different and must be very, very different. So I want to add this disclaimer now, that what we will be discussing from here on should be applied to our own personal suffering. And never, unless the circumstances allow, and of course with tremendous sensitivity, it should never be applied to the suffering of others. With regards to the suffering of others, it's as we mentioned. Our job is to be compassionate, to be empathetic, to be there to listen, and to do whatever we can to alleviate their suffering. That's pretty much where our job ends. But for ourselves, it's very, very important to gain a sense of perspective to our painful experiences, to be able to reframe our painful experiences and put them in a certain context. And that's what we will explore now. Okay? Two tools that we're going to explore that help us reframe our experiences. Here's the first. Rabbi Akiva, famous Talmudic sage, actually from the time of the Mishnah, was once traveling, and he had with him a donkey, a rooster, ancient alarm clock, and a torch. It's nightfall, he needs a place to spend the night. So he enters the closest city, and he's looking for a place to spend the night, lodging. Knocks on one door, another door, another door. So strange. No one will let him stay over. Not one person in the entire town will host Rabbi Akiva for the night. So without much choice, he goes into a nearby field and camps out there. And Rabbi Akiva, what's his reaction to this? It's certainly inconvenient, possibly dangerous, uncomfortable. Yet he says, everything God does is for the best. And it gets dark. Night falls. And suddenly, out of nowhere, a lion comes and kills his donkey. Now he's really stuck. How's he going to move around the next day? How's he going to travel? But everything God does is for the best. And a little while after, a cat comes and eats his rooster. And again, Rabbi Akiva says, everything God does is for the good. And finally, if things couldn't get any worse, well, the wind blows out his torch, and he's left in pitch blackness. But what does Rabbi Akiva say? Everything God does is for the good. The next morning, without his donkey, without his rooster, he continues by foot on his way. And he passes by that city that he approached the evening before where no one would give him lodging. And he can't believe what he sees. During the night, that city was ransacked. A group of thieves entered the city, took everything, and killed all the inhabitants. And obviously, if Rabbi Akiva was given a place to stay that night, he would have been amongst them. And if his donkey was alive and the thieves would have heard it braying, they would have found him. And if his rooster was alive and they would have heard it crow, they would have found him. And if his torch was lit, they would have seen the light and they would have found him. So Rabbi Akiva had far-reaching vision. His optimism paid off. Yes, everything God does is for the good, and he was able to see that in the end. All those annoying experiences, occurrences, at the time seemed incredibly annoying. The end of the world, but Rabbi Akiva maintained his perspective. No, everything God does is for the good. And in the end, he was able to see that that was the reality. Sometimes in life, we have experiences that not only do we ask ourselves why this experience is happening to me, but we have to take a moment to think, should I even classify this experience as negative? You know, they say hindsight is always 20/20. It's very easy to look back at some negative experiences we may have had in the past and to say, you know what, turned out so good in the end. I'm happier now than I ever was because of this very experience that at the time was so devastating. The trick is, in the moment, when we're going through the painful experience, to be able to maintain perspective and say, you know what, this too is for the good. And I'm sure we could think of so many real-life examples of this. You know, the person who loses their job and spends months, even years, job hunting, can't find anything, and then after so much time finds a job completely unrelated in a different field and discovers her life's calling and is so successful and fulfilled for the rest of her life. Or a person who has to undergo emergency surgery and the doctors found a whole other problem because they detected it early, it saved her life. Or conversely, you may have someone who wins the lottery, which seems like the best thing that ever could have happened to him, but we know what happens to a lot of lottery winners, it ruins their lives. So events in our lives really have to be taken with the right perspective. To be looking into the future, to be looking at the bigger picture. In fact, I want to show you something.
May I ask, how is this an example of the good experience? An entire town is massacred. This is an example of an horrific experience. Mm-hmm. This is such a narrow view of what a good experience is. He had to sleep in the field, and an entire town is massacred. How is this in any way an example of a good experience?
Okay, so it's
Unless there's
okay.
a blindness to the humanity of the people in the town.
Okay, it's an excellent point, and we're not talking at all of the experience of the people in the city.
Yeah,
We're talking about
this
Rabbi
was part of
Akiva's
the story,
experiences.
And that's what he took from it?
No, not at all. He didn't look at their experience and say, oh, their experience was for the good. That's not the point at all. The point was we're looking at his experience, that he experienced a whole series of annoying events. And those events turned out to be good for him. Not that the massacre was good for them, for the other people. That was terrible. But that's not so much the point. The point is to view the annoying things that happen in our lives as really being part of a bigger picture. And he was
Only
able
at
to
our
do that
personal
at our personal lives. Exactly. That's what I'm saying before. When it comes to other people's suffering, we don't apply this. Ever. If someone's suffering, we don't say, oh, it's really good.
But
That's
that's
not nice.
too big of a dichotomy to say part of the understanding of the good experience that God personally intervened in was to save me from a massacre, and I'm going to totally ignore their suffering in my understanding of the whole experience. You can't separate the two. It's happening at the same time. It has to be taken into account at the same time.
Okay, I hear you. The point of the story is more an optimism that we want to live with. You know, there's suffering in the world. We can't get around that. We can't avoid the suffering in the world. As terrible as it is and as painful as it is, we can't get around it. What we do need to do is develop tools to approach suffering. And the tool that the story emphasizes is optimism. How to employ optimism in our lives. When things happen to us, instead of saying, oh, this is really annoying, we say, it'll turn out to be okay. It'll turn out to be maybe more than okay, maybe good, maybe great, maybe better than before. But that really has no bearing. We're not even discussing the suffering of others. The suffering of others is terrible and it's painful, and unfortunately it's the reality of our world. But what we do want to take from the story is the tool, is the optimism, how to deal with the unfortunate events in our lives so we can cope with them better. Okay? We can discuss this further after the class. It's a great point. And if I haven't satisfactorily answered it, please let me know after the class and we'll continue with it. Okay? Now I want to show you an interesting phenomena here. Okay, see this painting? Anyone tempted to buy this? You see? You see all the way back there, Tamara? Anyone tempted to buy this? Okay, what about this? Getting better? Getting better? What do you think? Is it the same painting?
No.
It's a completely different picture. Okay? What we need to remember is that we are also like this little red dot in the scheme of history. That we are, essentially, we're part of a bigger picture. And so it's very hard to judge our experiences in a limited context, from a limited perspective. The truth is we have a limited perspective. We don't see the bigger picture of God's plans for the world. We only see our little red corner of the painting, which is not always so beautiful. That's all we see, and we have to remember, but that's not the only part of the painting. There's a much, much bigger picture. And it may seem annoying now, but God has plans for me, and it could turn out to be great. Okay? I'm just looking at the time here, and I'm wondering if we have some time for personal examples, since this is such a relevant concept. And I think if we would take a few minutes, we could probably all think of a time in our lives where something seemed to be the end of the world, and yet didn't turn out to be that way. Does anyone want to share something? No pressures. You don't have to, but if you would like to, we'd be happy to hear.
I guess right now my experience with my fractured wrist, I know it's
example.
not the end of the world, but it is senseless. Did I really need to break those bones? And it's affecting my life. It's affecting me.
Anything that happened that now in retrospect you can look back and say, oh, you know what? There was something good in that.
Well, people have been kind to me.
Okay, that's something
Ways
beautiful.
That they wouldn't, well, probably didn't even see me before, but now they see me, and there's a kindness I'm experiencing. But I guess it's just not a way to get attention.
You can think of better ways to get attention,
Yes.
right?
And
It's
just,
true.
you know?
Well, Natalia, I wish you that in a few years from now you'll be able to look back on this and see how it was actually something very good. And hopefully you should pass quickly.
I hope it does then, thank you.
Okay, so now that's one tool. Okay, we look at the bigger picture and keep things in perspective. But ladies, sometimes there are events in our lives that really don't seem to have the possibility of turning out good. There are such painful realities in our world, and maybe even in our personal lives, although I hope not, where it probably won't turn out to be good in a revealed sense. How do we cope with those? I'd like to look at two texts here. I'm going to look at text 8 and text 9. And here we have two amazing, amazing women in our history. The first is Rebecca, the wife of Isaac. His wife Rebecca was sterile, and Isaac pleaded with God for her sake. God granted his plea, and Rebecca became pregnant. But the children clashed in her belly, and she asked, "Why is this happening to me?" Rebecca went to seek a message from God. He said to her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two governments will separate from inside you. The upper hand will go from one government to the other, and eventually the older one will serve the younger one." Okay? Next text, text number 9. One Shabbat afternoon, while Rabbi Meir was lecturing at the academy, his two sons died. What did their mother, Bruriah, do? She laid them on the bed and covered them with a sheet. When Rabbi Meir arrived home after Shabbat, he asked, "Where are my sons?" "They went to the lecture hall," Bruriah replied. "But I looked in the study hall and I didn't see them," Rabbi Meir said. Bruriah handed her husband a glass of wine for Havdalah. He recited Havdalah and asked again, "Where are my sons?" "They went somewhere and will soon return," Bruriah replied, and then served dinner. After he ate, Bruriah said, "My teacher, I have a question to ask. Before today, a man left an item with me for safekeeping, and he has now come to collect it. Shall I return the item or not?" "My dear," Rabbi Meir replied, "is not a custodian required to return a deposit to its owner?" "My teacher," she replied, "if not for your words, I could not have brought myself to return it." Bruriah took his hand and led him to the bedroom. She approached the bed, drew back the sheet, and he saw his two children lying dead. My sons, my teachers," he cried. "They were my sons in the ways of the world, and my teachers, for they enlightened my eyes with the words of Torah." At that moment, Bruriah interjected, "My teacher, did you not tell me that we are required to return our deposit to its master? God has given and God has taken. May his name be blessed for eternity." Said Rabbi Hanina. With these words, she offered him solace and relief from the intensity of his grief. Of her it is written, "A woman of valor who can find." Now here we have two examples of pain. The first, physical pain, and the second, very intense emotional pain. In either case, to the consolation they were offered, take away the pain. No.
In the first case, I would say it probably made it even worse.
I don't know if it made it worse, but the pain certainly continued because she was still pregnant for another while, and those two babies were still fighting.
It's a lifelong fight.
That's true. Okay, the pain was still there.
Made it worse.
The pain was still there. Okay, she was still pregnant and still suffering the pains of those babies clashing. And in the second case, obviously, the sons had passed away and they weren't coming back to life. The pain was very much there. So what changed? So what we see here is that in both cases, with Rebecca, and Bruriah, they were able to ascribe meaning and a purpose to their pain. With Rivka, she realized that she was given a specific, special task, that these two babies who were causing her such physical pain were really the heads of 2 nations that will have tremendous global historical impact until today. So although the pain was still there, because she realized it was for a very important purpose, she was able to cope with it. And Bruria as well, since she viewed her tragedy in the context of being able to bring 2 souls into the world and caring for them properly. And now, having finished that task, that put her pain into a context, that gave her pain some meaning. And again, she was able to cope. To bring this into a much more superficial, more mundane example, but which really brings home the point. Say, you're in physical pain from a good workout. Your legs are very, very sore. It's very, very painful. But because you know that the cause of the pain was an intense physical workout the day before, it's all good, it's all normal, so the pain is more manageable. As opposed to a person feeling tremendous pain in their legs from some unknown cause. There's no context for it. So together with the physical pain, you have this worry. You don't know what to do with it. It may be overwhelming. Once we're able to take pain and suffering and give it meaning, in other words, that it's not random, it's not senseless, but there is some sort of purpose to it, and the person can cope. And it's the first step to begin healing. Without a purpose, without meaning, there's no closure. It's very hard to begin to heal. And ultimately, both Rebecca and with Bruria, their ability to lend meaning to their very, very painful experiences came from their deep faith. And this is a faith beyond just believing that this will turn out to be good. Because in both cases, the pain wasn't going to go away. They didn't see how it was going to turn out to be good. Rivka was in physical pain. There's nothing she could do about it. And with Bruria, the pain that she was going through, her sons weren't coming back. Where was the revealed good there? There wasn't revealed good. But their faith was so deep that despite the fact that they didn't perceive any revealed good coming out of it, they were still able to believe that there was a purpose to it, that it's part of God's plan somehow. There's some kind of mission there, some kind of purpose. And this kind of faith is not a faith that we find in hard times. Because once the hard times hit, God forbid, that's not the time to start finding faith. It's too late. This kind of faith is a philosophy. It's a philosophy that guides our life in good times. And therefore, God forbid, bad times, we have it. We were just reading in the Torah portion the last couple of weeks about Joseph in Egypt. He was the second in command to Pharaoh. And he had interpreted these 2 strange dreams that Pharaoh had to mean that there would be 7 years of plenty in Egypt, 7 good years, followed by 7, anyone familiar with the story? The 7 lean years. And Pharaoh got really nervous, so what are we going to do in the 7 lean years? So Joseph advised him that during the 7 years of plenty, what we're going to do is we're going to fortify our storehouses. We're going to gather food. We're not going to gorge ourselves in those years. We're going to eat only what we need to, and we're going to save. And therefore, when the 7 lean years come around, we'll have food to draw on. And there's a very powerful spiritual lesson there as well. That in the good years, when things are going well, that's the time to spiritually fortify ourselves, to work on our faith. So that God forbid, on a day that's not so good, we have it to draw on. We're not starting from scratch then when there's no resources. If there's no resources, there's no tools. There's nothing to draw on. But if you store up those resources, then you have them. How do we do that? How do we develop a faith? How do we build up a faith? And the truth is, the amazing, simple truth is that it's built into our Jewish soul. We don't have to figure out where they market this faith. We don't have to go out looking for it. We all have it. We're born with it. It's part of our Jewish soul. And it's like a spiritual muscle. The more you use a muscle, the stronger it gets. And the more we use our faith, the stronger it gets. And using our faith essentially means that we view our experiences, we view our daily mundane lives through the lenses of faith. And this could be as simple as, and this is something that I actually do, maybe it's a little bit embarrassing, but imagine you're going shopping on Robson Street and parking there is crazy, and you really don't want to circle the block a few times because you're running late, or perhaps you have like me, I have my baby with me and I don't want to park too far. And you pass the store and there's a parking spot right in front. And maybe there's even 15 minutes on the meter. And you say, thank you, God. Because this event also is part of God's plan. And I'm going to recognize it. I'm going to view this seemingly insignificant event in my day through the lenses of my faith. Thank you, God. And I do that, and my kids laugh at me in the back seat. But yeah, thank you, God. You made my life a little bit easier. Or to the more serious. Let's say you weren't feeling very well the past couple of days and you have a very important presentation to do at work today. And somehow, miraculously, when you woke up this morning, you felt great. God, I really appreciate it. Thanks. Or even for the things we take for granted, which is much harder. Thanks, God, that I'm feeling good today. Thanks that my children are healthy. Thank you that I have a stable job. Thank you that I have loving people in my life. These are all ways to view my life, my experiences every day on a good day through the lenses of my faith. And if we do that regularly when things are going well, and God forbid when things are not going so well, we have gotten into that habit. And we'll continue to do it. It's harder, 100%. But it's definitely easier that way than if you haven't been using the muscle at all.
Thanking God for a gift of laughter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And another very good way, by the way, ladies, to develop that innate faith that we have is through communicating with God. So whether it's informally, as I just mentioned, thanks God, appreciate this, appreciate that, you made my day easier. Also through formal prayer, the formal prayers of every day. And also, and this is very, very powerful, going back to the very beginning of our class, through Psalms. Psalms have an unbelievable power that other prayers don't have to really... Psalm, Tehillim. To break through decrees. Psalms just go straight up.
What's the word you're using?
Tehillim.
Tehillim.
Psalms. Has a funny spelling, actually. P-S.
P-S.
A-L-M-S.
Oh,
Psalms. Very, very, very powerful. And there's lots written on it, and I welcome you all to check it out. Yes, that's the word. A young woman was once having some issues, some difficulties with her marriage, and she went crying to her mother. Her mother listened. She took out 3 pots, filled them with water, and set them to boil. Once the water was boiling, she put a carrot in the first pot, an egg in the second pot, and ground coffee beans in the third pot. Half an hour later, she takes out the carrot, she takes out the egg. She shows her daughter, look, the carrot, it's all soft now. The egg became hard-boiled egg. And now taste from the third pot. And she drank a bit of the water. It's delicious. Coffee, if you like coffee, that is. And she told her daughter, she said, life throws at you boiling water sometimes. We all go through boiling water experiences. And we have a choice. We could become like the carrot, soft, weak, self-pitying, perhaps. Or we could become like the egg, tough, hardened from our experiences. Or we could infuse our boiling water. We could infuse our painful experiences with a beautiful aroma, the delicious flavor. And it's up to us to choose, are we going to be the carrot, the egg, or the coffee beans? And when we use our faith muscle, it allows us to be the coffee beans when life gets tough. That instead of being defeated by life, because there are going to be, unfortunately, hard times in our lives, and we go through them. And instead of being defeated by them and growing soft, or being defeated by them and growing tough, becoming hard people. We can choose to give meaning to our experiences, to view them either as part of a bigger picture, it's good, it's all good, like Rivka, you mentioned at the beginning of class, or if we can't view it as good, we can still give it meaning and purpose and develop the proper perspective for looking at it, for dealing with it, for coping. Now, Judaism doesn't say that existence and suffering have to go hand in hand. Because the truth is, this is not the ideal state of the world. When the world was first created, there was no pain and suffering built in. Only after the sin of the tree of knowledge did suffering and pain and hardship enter the world. So it's not really the way that it's supposed to be. The time of Mashiach, the Messianic age, the world will revert back to how it was supposed to be originally, with no pain and no suffering. So here we are in the month of Tevet. And we spoke about the energies, how the energies of this month allow us to draw on our inner resources and cope with painful experiences and gain the right perspective and be able to move on, hopefully. But there's another energy in this month as well. And this is an energy that we could tap into that gives us the power and the determination to beg God, to demand from God that we want the world to go back to the way it's supposed to be. On the day when we remember how our temple fell, we demand from God, God, we want to rebuild our third temple. We want a permanent end to pain and suffering. That's it, we had enough. And this month has a certain energy that's conducive to us demanding this. To us doing what it takes to bring about a time where there's no more suffering. And this is done through love and acceptance of our fellow Jews, of people around us, especially since the opposite was what caused us to come into exile all those years ago. And of course, through increasing an act of goodness and kindness, bringing more love and hope and kindness to this world. And of course, demanding from God that we had enough. And hopefully this Friday, instead of fasting and mourning our exile and mourning our personal tragedies, God willing, we'll be in Jerusalem, the coming of Mashiach, with only good things and only happiness from here on. Anyone have any thoughts to add to that? Can anyone personally relate to this feeling of, on one hand, feeling abandoned by God, yet on the other hand, reaching out to God for help?
I remember Rabbi Dubrovsky always taught, no matter what happens, it's for the good. God does everything for the good. We don't necessarily understand it. In fact, we just don't. Mm-hmm. But it is for the good. And if you can just believe in that, it changes the way you look at life. It certainly has changed me dramatically. Mm-hmm. So that when horrible things happen, I just go, wait a minute. There's a reason for this. Can I think of the reason? And if I can't, then okay, I accept that it's necessary. Let's get on with the next bit.
Mm-hmm. That's a very, very important point. Yeah. It's not an easy thing. It's very important. And I'm glad you brought that up, Rivka, because that is actually something that we will be exploring in depth in tonight's class. Okay, so hold that. We're going to get to it soon. So this paradox of feeling neglected, that event was a catalyst for a whole series of calamities, culminating in the destruction of the Second Temple and the exile we find ourselves in now, which has been full, unfortunately,
of pain and suffering, which still hasn't ended. And what I would like to explore tonight, to ask ourselves tonight is, where did our ancestors find the tools to cope with suffering throughout all of history? And how do we find those tools today to cope with our own suffering? Whether it's on a global scale, as a Jewish nation, the suffering that we go through, or on a personal level. How do we cope? How do we react? What should our reaction be to our painful experiences? Now, let's start with the obvious question. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is there suffering? Why do we have to go through these painful experiences? This is a very human question. It definitely does not demonstrate a lack of belief in God. If anything, it proves the opposites. Because if one does not believe in God, then they believe the world is, this coming Friday is the 10th of Tevet, which is a sad day on the Jewish calendar. In the year 425 before the Common Era, King Nebuchadnezzar, who's the Babylonian king, laid siege to Jerusalem. And 2 years later, the walls of Jerusalem were breached. And in the month of Av of that year, the temple fell. And subsequently, the Jews lost their autonomy of Israel and they were exiled to Babylonia. Although several decades later, the Persians vanquished the Babylonians and the Jews were able to rebuild their second temple, a few hundred years later, 400 years later, the second temple was destroyed as well. And again, we found ourselves in exile, the exile that we still find ourselves in to this day. And the truth is that even though the Jews did rebuild the second temple, and they had that second temple for over 400 years, they never truly regained autonomy. So we see that the event of the 10th of Tevet, when the Babylonians surrounded the city of Jerusalem, good evening, ladies. And thank you so much for coming out in this cold weather. The topic of today's class is finding faith. And we'll be looking at a Jewish perspective on pain and suffering. I'd like to start with a text on page 22 in your books. It's an excerpt from a song. It's in my Kindle. I'm going to ask you to take a quick look at that and see if you could find a paradox there. Have you found it? It jumps out on you. It's pretty clear. Okay, Rivka, tell us your thoughts.
My God, obviously he believes in God. Why have you forsaken him? He hasn't. But it's kind of a confusing song.
Yes, it is. It's this paradox. On one hand, David is asking God why he abandoned him, but he's asking that of that very same God who he's accusing of his neglect. By God yet turning to God is one of a few questions that we will be looking at tonight while we explore how Judaism, how Torah looks at how we approach painful experiences, how we approach suffering. We now find ourselves in the beginning of the Hebrew month of Teves. Teves is the darkest month of the year, physically, and spiritually as well. The energies of Teves are Tevet, in other pronunciations. Do you remember the spelling of it? It's Tevet. The energies of the month of Teves or Tevet are conducive to taking a look at how we view our not such good experiences in life and to finding the tools to effectively deal with these experiences. This is the month where we get an extra boost, so to speak, from the energies around us to do that and to accomplish that.